real-life fiction stories, and thank you for joining me. Why don't you come in close? Because tonight, I have a real honest-to-goodness true story that you can look up for yourself. A story about dark times and the monsters that come out to feed when people are at their most desperate. A story about one monster in particular who preyed on infants and their parents. A monster that would charge a fee for their murders and pass it off as mercy. The air was heavy, and the wounds of war were still fresh in the minds and hearts of the people who walked the streets that cold December morning of 1947. Their country, now occupied by the victorious Allies, the people of Tokyo did their best to rebuild and continue on, though many lived in poverty and struggled to support their families, let alone themselves. Hitoshi and Kiko walked closely together, arm in arm, as he helped his pregnant wife along. She was due any time now. Their breath left their mouths in bursts of steam as they talked, but now, as they approached the wooden building, they had fallen silent. Kotobuki-sanin loomed above them, eerily quiet for a maternity home. Scantly a single child's cry could be heard from within. Their presence out front had been noticed, and as they looked at each other in quiet despair, the two were suddenly greeted by an eagerly smiling 50-year-old midwife named Miyuki Ishikawa. The midwife bid them enter, and the couple indulged, though still questioning their decision in their thoughts. Miyuki took Kiko's hand and clasped it between hers, squeezing it with compassion and reassurance. Miyuki knew the couple were having second thoughts, and looked into Kiko's eyes, and asked her to explain what dire situation had brought the couple to see her this morning. It was a familiar story to Miyuki. They were poor, and could barely struggle to survive, and the country this and hardships that. Blah, blah, blah. She had heard it all before, and the longer her client went on falling deeper and deeper into despair, Miyuki became more and more convinced she had them. Kiko had finished her story, and now it was Miyuki's turn. She would build them up for being so brave and strong, and to have made it through such hard times, and reassure them that their trouble was indeed great, almost insurmountable. She would tell them how rare it was a couple came in to see her, that usually it was a poor lone mother with child out of wedlock, and how lucky they were to have each other. Then she would remind them of how much a child would be, not just for food, oh no, but also the care and clothing and doctor's visits. How could anyone in their situation be expected to afford such a burden? 2 people is hard enough to care for. How much more would it be for 3? Of course, for less than it would cost to have a child. Miyuki was more than happy to take the burden off of them and place it on Kotobuki-sanin, a facility that could ensure the child was mercifully dealt with, and that it would not suffer the hardships the 2 of them faced. Eager to believe the situation was not only beneficial for everyone, but also the right thing to do, Hitoshi and Kiko agreed to give their baby to Miyuki, with no further hesitation. December ended, and as January began, Hitoshi and Kiko gave birth to and turned over their infant to Miyuki, confident in their decision that it was the right thing to do. Takeshi Ishikawa, Miyuki's husband, had collected the payment and in exchange handed them their child's fake death certificate to present to authorities, thereby ridding them of any further burden. He looked at the infant briefly before leaving the room. Miyuki cradled the infant and smiled at the couple before turning and leaving the 2 to prepare to leave and disappear into obscurity, along with the many other parents before them. Miyuki's footsteps were heavy and resolute. She wore no expression, and her breathing was steady. No emotion ran through her as she lay the infant on the floor knowing its fate. She closed the soji door, letting the infant's cries fall and wash over her, but refusing to let them in. She would return in a few days to deal with its corpse. It was cold, even inside Kotobuki-sanin that January morning, and Miyuki's bones ached as she crossed the floor to the infant's room. Business had been good lately, and so she did not complain. She slid open the soji door and found the bodies of 5 infants motionless on the floor. Hitoshi and Kiko's daughter had lasted longer than she had thought, but she had eventually joined the fate of the 4 next to her. Miyuki called out for her assistance and watched and as the last child was thrown into the wooden box with the 4 others and carried out to be dumped like refuse, she turned, intent on a warm cup of tea. She passed by her husband and casually informed him of the need to call Dr. Nakayama to secure more falsified death certificates, as 2 more women had come in yesterday, and to inform the doctor that he would be paid in usual fashion. Takeshi nodded and obliged. On January 12, 1948, 2 policemen had been on patrol from the Waseda precinct in Tokyo, when quite by accident, the 2 came upon the corpses of 5 infants left out like trash. The police officers quickly recovered the bodies to have autopsies performed to determine the cause of death, as the children looked like they had been anything but healthy prior to death. When the reports came back, they had confirmed that the children had died from neglect, rather than from illness or other such natural causes. This was the catalyst into the investigation that would eventually lead to the arrest of Miyuki Ishikawa and her accomplices. Miyuki Ishikawa was born February 5, 1897, in the small village of Honjo, in the Miyazaki prefecture, and when she was 27, she moved to Tokyo, where she had graduated from the Tokyo Imperial University as midwife, and met her husband, Takeshi Ishikawa, a former sergeant and police officer in whom, without a regular job, began assisting his wife with her midwifery. In the 1940s, due to World War II, Japan had been hit hard by poverty and began to experience a population boom that was common to most countries post-war. However, many of the children born were out of wedlock, and combined with the poverty rate at the time, many parents opted for abandoning their children outside, leaving them to succumb to the elements. Those that could not bear the thought of killing their children themselves would most often leave them at maternity homes for the possibility of adoption. Unfortunately, due to the previously mentioned conditions, foster parents were near impossible to find. Miyuki had not despaired over the plight of her fellow countrymen, but instead saw a burgeoning business opportunity. It is not clear how many parents were aware their children would be murdered via purposeful neglect, though some most certainly did, and Miyuki would charge a fee for relieving the parents of the burden of another person to care for. With the assistance of her husband and one Dr. Shiro Nakayama, as well as various assistants, an untold number of infants would meet their end. It must be noted that some of the assistants to Miyuki would quit their job at Kotobuki-sanin when they learned of what was taking place. Miyuki's grisly practice would come to an end on January 15, 1948, 3 days after 2 police officers found the remains of 5 children, and the autopsies confirmed death by unnatural causes. On the day she was arrested, 7 surviving infants were found at her maternity home, though 2 would die despite medical attention. Police also discovered the ashes of 40 infants in the house of a mortician, 30 urns of infant ashes in a temple, and burial permits for 84 more infants. Due to the length of time in which Miyuki had been practicing, and the number of remains, it was difficult for authorities to pin down exactly how many children were murdered, and as such, the prosecution were only able to move forward with the charge of 27 murders between April 1946 and January of 1948. On October 11, 1948, this number had been reduced to 5 children, 2 of which had been the children recovered, but whom died at the hospital. Due to Japanese law at the time, however, Miyuki, Takeshi, and Dr. Nakayama were not convicted of murder, but instead had been convicted of omission due to the falsifying of death certificates. Subsequently, Takeshi and Dr. Nakayama were sentenced to 4 years, and Miyuki to 8 years. Appeals occurred from both the prosecution as well as the defense, as the sentence did not sit well with either side. In the end, the final sentence for Takeshi and Dr. Nakayama was 2 years, and Miyuki would serve 4 years. When Miyuki was released from prison, she would continue her life clinging to her innocence, blaming the parents for abandoning the children at her maternity home in the first place. She took up a job selling soap, cream, and fish. By 1969, Takeshi had passed away, and Miyuki had begun operating a real estate office in Tokyo. She herself would eventually pass away May 30th, 1987 at the age of 90, and to this day, continues to live on only in infamy.